Okay, welcome to this meeting of the Local Plan Working Group, Monday the 7th of March 2022. I'm trying to remember all my protocols for in-house meetings again, so if I could ask if people turn off their mobile phones or turn them on to silent. We do have one member of the public, so if you do need the toilet, I think you may have already found those behind there. We are not expecting a fire alarm, so if the fire alarm goes, the building will be getting warmer and we should head out as quickly as possible and meet outside the Grand Hotel. Item 1 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Do I have any declarations of interest? Councillor de Gorn.
Yes, I don't have any shares in mining operations, but I did take part in a number of protests against fracking by Third Energy at Kirby Misperton in 2017-18. This is in relation to item 5. However, as I understand it, that operation has now ceased, so I don't consider that to be prejudicial.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. I was also chairman of Frack Free York and the Villages and also took part in protests at Kirby Misperton. But again, that is now defunct and Frack Free York and the Villages has gone into hibernation. So again, I don't consider that to be prejudicial. Thank you.
Councillor Looker.
Thank you. Yes, I am down in Myers this evening. I don't think it's a prejudicial interest. In fact, I'm sure it isn't. But as Councillor for Guildhall Ward, I have sat in on and had discussions about the York Minster Precinct Neighbourhood Plan. I can't say I'm entirely unprejudiced about it, but I haven't got an interest because don't live in the relevant neighbourhood, but I have had some briefings on it.
I think the one thing I've learnt from that is since May 2019 we have a lot less councillors with shares in oil and gas than we did pre-May 2019, which used to be the point of interest. Councillor Cuthbertson is now going to tell me he has got shares in some fracking company.
Thank you, Chair. A personal interest, my wife and I are members of the Minster community. Thank you.
Okay, no more declarations of interest. And as Councillor Looker did point out, I have forgotten one of my protocols is that we do have 2 apologies. And Councillor Myers has been substituted by Councillor Looker and Councillor Doughty by Councillor Rowley. Brings us to item 2, which is the minutes of the meeting, the last meeting we had, which is some time ago now. 13th of July 2021, which was back on Zoom. Are we happy for me to agree those as a correct record? Okay. So that brings us to item 3, public participation. We do have one member of the public registered to speak today, Mr. Jeff Beacon. I can invite you to come to the table. He wants to speak on matters within the remit of the committee, the local plan and the national planning policy framework, and the local plan and housing. You have approximately 3 minutes, Mr. Beacon, and I'll try to give you a 30-second warning.
Press it hard. Oh, it's gone green, that's right. Well, thank you for having me. 2 issues that I want to speak to. One is on the same lines as our MP for York Central spoke on in Parliament about the York housing racket and how poverty is being pushed on people by higher rents and landlords can name their prices, and she did this in December. Aspiring rents, incomers are coming in, and these incomers are more than expected in the objective assessment of housing needs that initially started in the local plan, and and things like Airbnb and holiday lets are pushing people out as well. So in the original OAN, the figures were far too low, but the government seemed to have forced a housing action delivery plan on the council so that there have been increases in housing projections. But what I found most interesting was item 623 in the Housing Action Plan. And it said the problem is that much land is held by a small number of developers. And it made me recall some decade or so ago, came in to see some council officials and made more or less the same point. They didn't seem to know, or possibly want to know, who the owners of the land were. Now, I know this may fall outside planning law, I'm not sure of that, but I think it's a duty of the planners and the local plan to identify who the people will get the enormous bonus of planning gain, which is probably £2 billion worth of planning gain in the next decade or so. It's an enormous amount of money, and along with that goes an even bigger amount of money, the increase in the value of house prices that will be gained by the more affluent and the house owners. So, as it stands, the local plan doesn't really address these, as our MP has pointed out. And we must be in a better position to make negotiations with whoever owns the land, and we don't know who they are, or not what. I'm sure people do know who they are, but then they ought to be public knowledge, not just private knowledge or restricted knowledge. Now on to something rather more serious.
If I could ask you to start winding up now, we have gone over the 3 minutes.
Oh, sorry. Well, WS2, the working group 2 of the climate change IPCC says things are really bad. And if you look at the maps that the Institute of Transport Studies are producing in Leeds, the carbon footprints of people in Strensall are about 5 times the average footprint of the people in the middle of York. Now, this cannot fit in with York's climate emergency or the National Planning Policy Framework, which has signed up to UN Resolution 42/187, which in brief says we mustn't screw the world up for other countries and future generations. And people with 5 times the city centre footprints are clearly doing that, and we ought to find some way of getting them off the hook. That's the way things have happened. They possibly don't know this, but we are in a dreadful climate situation that this plan is allowing to go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bacon, and I'll certainly get officers to have a look at some of those issues you've raised. I know we are aware of most landowners. I think that information is publicly available, so we'll see how we can make that a little bit clearer for you.
Sorry, what was that? What will be made clearer?
The landowners, I think most of that is is listed as part of the local plan documentation.
And I hope the footprints as well.
Okay.
You know, there's enormous difference.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bacon. That takes us on to item 4, which is the York Minster Precinct Neighbourhood Plan, the examiner's report and decision statement. And I'll hand over first to Neil Ferris.
Thank you, Chair. So the report in front of you has been to the planning inspector, and he's made some recommendations for minor amendment. The report this evening is for your consideration, and then make on to executive to determine whether or not to go to a local referendum. That's obviously part of the statutory process that we're familiar with here in York, and I'll hand over to Sophie to just talk you through some of the detail of the preparation and the inspector's comments regarding the plan.
Thank you, Neil. As Neil has said, this recommendation is based on an independent examination of the neighbourhood plan. The examiner's report includes a number of proposed modifications. These are to ensure that the plan meets the basic requirements of the statutory process. Officers agree with the proposed modifications, and it is worth noting that we also agree with the proposed referendum area put forward by the independent examiner. The examiner comments that the plan is very impressive. It provides a clear and concise strategic vision for one of York's cultural assets. The plan is based on extensive public consultation going back a number of years. The vision and objectives seek to enhance the Minster's status as a heritage and cultural asset and to make best use of its assets, including the public realm. There are 6 policies: general principles, sustainable development, historic environment, well-being, movement in place, monitoring and review. There are 4 project areas: Minster Land and College Green, West Front and Queen Elizabeth Square, Learning and Gardens at the Old Palace. These are all subject to development briefs, pre-applications or further consultation with Historic England National Highways and other statutory bodies. The referendum area recommended by the inspector is moderately larger than the area of the neighbourhood plan itself. This is a reflection of the area that was consulted on with local residents and local businesses. It is also a reflection that the impacts of the proposals will have a moderate implication on neighbouring residents. Whilst undertaking a review of the inspector's recommendations regarding the referendum area, it was noted that there was an anomaly with regards to one of the postcodes and a block of flats that was in fact in Layerthorpe area that was identified as being within the postcode recommended by the inspector. And as such, they will not be included in the referendum.
Thank you, Sophie. I'll open it up to any questions or comments from the committee. Councillor Lucker.
No comments particularly, no questions particularly. As I said, I have been involved and I look forward to going through in far more detail but some of the recommendations from the inspector. But I would have said broadly the plan is hugely acceptable. 2 things I like about it. One is that it is a city centre neighbourhood plan. I think it's the first one we have had for the city centre. And when you think of, and I raised this at main planning a few weeks ago, when you think of the number of communities around York that have got neighbourhood plans, I hope this can be the beginning of expanding neighbourhood plans for the city centre, which will enable us to take control of and work more closely with our communities to look at how the city centre should be developed. But the other thing I very much appreciate with the neighbourhood plan from the Minster is the work they are putting into creating historic apprenticeships, training opportunities for people who wish to work within the historic stonework, masonry. This is getting attractions from not just the Britain, but Europe, provided we don't bomb our bloody cathedrals to bits over the next few years. But if we can perhaps hang on to our cathedrals for a bit longer. So many of our ancient buildings do require regular work on them and regular update. And I think the work that the Minster is putting into supporting the training and apprenticeships for those workers is absolutely fantastic and deserves high commendation.
I would certainly echo that last point, Councillor Lucker, and I think it is something that does tend to travel the world as well. We do have people going around and sharing that knowledge, not just across the city, but across the world, where people are trying to maintain these types of buildings. Councillor Orwell, was that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I agree with what Councillor Lucas said, and with all neighbourhood plans, a lot of people have put an awful lot of work into getting to the situation we're in. And yes, it would be good if more communities did get themselves neighbourhood plans. But when they do that, I think planning committees have got to take full account of what's being decided in the neighbourhood plan and make sure that all that work is recognised and we don't go against the neighbourhood plans unless it's absolutely necessary.
As spoken by a ward councillor, I think it's probably got the longest running neighbourhood plan in terms of going through the Huntington one. Has been one of the most challenging, I think. Any other comments or questions? Okay, I think, again, echoing the words of Councillor Looker, I think so much work does go into it, and it is, I've written the words coalition of the willing. I think those outer wards have parish councils that have the time to be able to go through and do that work. I fully support what you're saying in terms of how we support people to bring that same sort of resource to the city centre where they don't necessarily have those ward councillors to do it. I think that's something we can probably take away and have a think about how we can help support different communities to have the infrastructure to do that, and then obviously to thank the work the officers have put into getting us to this stage as well. So with that one, we have the recommendations at paragraph 2 on page 7 running through onto page 8. Are we happy to agree those? Okay, thank you, sir. Which takes us on to agenda item 5, adoption of the Minerals and Waste Joint Plan. And I was considering, as one of my predecessors once did, former Councillor Merritt, going through page by page to give everybody opportunity to comment on specific paragraphs, but I think maybe that might be taking it a little bit too far, so I'll hand over to Neil again.
Thank you, Chair. The report in front of you is effectively recommending the process which John will go through for formal adoption of the Minerals and Waste Joint Plan. We've produced for members this evening a copy of the policies map, which is also proposed to be adopted. It's such a large file when you put it into digital format that we've not been able to send that to you digitally. But and we would like to use these next week for executive as well, if we can, in terms of the interest of the environment and printing. But those members who want a copy of the York map, which is the map 9, if you just drop yourself a line, we'll make sure you get a copy of that map 9, but the rest of it appertains to predominantly North Yorkshire and the North Yorkshire Moors National Park authorities, which we are also progressing the adoption of this plan through. A number of members mentioned their close relationship with the development of this plan in terms of the consideration of fracking, so I'll just address that concern within the actual policy itself. Members will see on the page 300, there's the actual recommendations there to have extra levels of sensitivity and evidence base required by anybody proposing to undertake fracking within the area. And that 500-metre boundary in terms of sensitive receptors, when you lay that over the areas of national beauty, the historic character and setting of York, then there is a significant, and I'm talking over 80% land coverage by those 500-metre receptors. So the predominant area of the area of North Yorkshire and York will be covered by that extra higher threshold in terms of demonstrating the sensitivities. Just finally to note that on that regard as well, the government's moratorium continues, but clearly the adoption of this plan will give us planning weight in terms of York. And there are just 2 sites within our municipal boundary that are identified in terms of minerals and waste development, and John will touch upon them in his more detailed presentation. John, hand it to you.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Yeah, the purpose of this report is to report the outcomes of the examination by the Government Inspector into the Mineral Waste Local Plan and the accompanying proposals of the map. It's to provide a recommendation that the authority makes the necessary procedural arrangements to complete the adoption of the document. The plan was produced jointly by City of York Council, North Yorkshire County Council and the North York Moors National Park Authority over the last decade or so. The plan was adopted by North Yorkshire County Council on the 16th of February this year and will be reported to North York Moors National Park Authority, we believe, in March as well. The examination ran from February to March 2018, with an additional session in April 18 and also further sessions in January 19 covering unconventional oil and gas. The inspector was Ms Elizabeth Ord, and she was appointed to determine whether the plan was deemed as sound or not and passed the test of soundness. The inspector report was received on the 4th of February 2022, and it concluded that the plan was sound, taking into account the main modifications recommended by her that were discussed as part of the examination process itself. Paragraph 10 of the report summarises the key policy aspects of the plan, which members obviously want to look at. Additionally, as Neil said, the policies map, we've produced paper copies of that because it's too big to send out digitally, and map 9 in particular covers the York area. Right, okay, if members do want to recommend adoption of the plan at full council, there's a 6-week period of High Court challenge, which must be taken into account on the grounds that 1, the document is not within the appropriate power of the local authority, or 2, the procedural arrangements have not been complied with. As part of the process, we will include press notices, an adoption statement, and also putting copies of the documents in local libraries and place where it's put on deposit. The recommendations are set out in paragraph 2 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Open it up to any questions or comments. Councillor Dagon.
Right. Firstly, I'd say that very much welcome all the work that's gone into this. It's quite clearly a weighty document that has significant time elapsed to reach this point. And whilst it does feel very wrong to be supporting a document that still allows for new fossil fuel extraction in the face of a climate emergency, I do recognise the points that Neil has made and more that are highlighted within this document. So whilst fracking is clearly a dirty, dangerous activity that many of us feel should be banned outright, and the events in Ukraine only serve to underline the urgency of us moving away from reliance on fossil fuels and nuclear power. But sadly, that's not yet government policy. And significant effort has gone into securing the limitations that have been referred to, which were strongly opposed by some of the commercial interests at the time. So if the government were to lift the moratorium, this policy would still present a stronger challenge and safeguards than the national policy in the MPPF. And so on that basis, I feel that reluctantly we do need to support the adoption of this policy, acknowledging that many of us would much rather go further in terms of what's in it, but this is a shared policy, as has been said, with North Yorkshire and the North Yorkshire Moors National Park.
Any further questions or comments? Do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Chair. Just to reflect to Councillor Dagon, I think that the understanding that, again, that from a national planning policy perspective, we've got to have a proactive approach to policy development and facilitate development. And Councillor Dagon's right, there isn't an option just to effectively, through planning process, deny the ability to develop in accordance with national policy frameworks, but you can effectively reflect and put safeguards in place, and that's what this policy does.
I think as someone who's had the fortune of following this probably for 6 to 7 years, I do recall those debates that we had, and I think we did, as a committee, we did push it as literally as far as we could in terms of getting as much in as possible, at times with some conflict with officers, I'll be honest. And there was some interesting discussions between officers and members, and I think we really did take that to the nth degree as we possibly could, and it gives us as much protection as we can within the framework that we're working with. So I think I do also welcome that one, Councillor Dagon. If there are no further comments then, are we happy to agree the recommendations on page 189, paragraph 2, and over the page onto 190? Agree? Okay, I have no urgent business, so I'm happy